Well, welcome to another episode of All Opinions Welcome. Today we've got a fabulous guest, Peter Bleksley. Now, you might recognise him as the Chief from Channel 4's multi-award-winning show, The Hunt. But he's obviously a cop with serious pedigree. So, Peter, everyone's an expert on TV these days, but you actually are an expert in policing. Tell us, if you can, about your policing career.
Certainly. Well, I joined as a raw, young, naive 18-year-old uniform cop way back in 1978. Did about 3.5 years in uniform, including spending a terrifying weekend at the Brixton riots of 1981, where people quite clearly wanted to kill me and my colleagues. And it was that weekend that made me say to myself, I no longer want to wear this cloth, this symbol of oppression of what it had become in South East London. And I decided to take up the offer of going down the detective route.
And you went undercover, and you founded an undercover unit, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
What was that about?
Well, I did some of your more traditional detective work before that happened, catching rapists, murderers and those kind of people, very serious crime. But then in 1985, I was posted to Scotland Yard as a young 25-year-old, extremely ambitious and determined and committed. And of course, commitment is the word for policing. If anybody's ever thinking about joining the police, you have to have the commitment word ringing in your head day in, day out. Got to Scotland Yard, saw how the undercover operatives were doing it at the time. This is the mid-1980s. The explosion of cocaine onto the streets of Britain, the birth of the rave generation and ecstasy tablets and all of that. And I personally felt that some of the undercover guys were a bit stuck in their ways. They weren't perhaps moving with the times. In other words, the villains were sussing it out, that if you draped yourself in gold, had a very expensive suit, and sat in the bar of a posh hotel and refused to go anywhere, they'd think, I think then you might be an undercover cop. It needed some fresh thinking. We had to think out of the box for the time. And I was very fortunate to be supported by some brilliant senior officers who just backed me. And I kind of rewrote the rule book that didn't even exist. And we took a lot more risks. We would then go to the homes, the flats, the houses, the businesses of the bad guys. We'd negotiate on their territory in the darkened alleyways, often when they're in possession of guns and all that kind of, frankly, horrifying stuff. I also posed as an arms dealer, as a contract killer, so I plotted and planned a few murders where people thought I was going to be the assassin, and all those kind of things. And I had an incredibly high-octane, adrenaline-fueled career. I was undercover for over a decade until it all went horribly wrong when some people really wanted to wipe me off the face of the earth. A report got stolen that compromised my identity, my name was in it. There was panic in the corridors of Scotland Yard, and I very hurriedly had to be snatched out of my flat where I lived, abandon my home, my identity, any trace of who I really was, and I was parachuted into the witness protection program.
So these days, it's fair to say that whenever anything terrible happens, you get the call. I mean, you're all over the television at the moment about this horrific case of the 39 dead people in Essex in the back of a lorry believed to be Chinese nationals. Now, I want to talk to you today about border control. It's a huge issue, and this seems to be a relevant way in. How prevalent do you think are these kinds of people smuggling operations across Europe, and how important is a more robust border control to try and deal with that?
Well, we're an island nation with literally thousands of miles of coastline. And of course, I know this only too well from when I was at the drug squad at Scotland Yard, for example, and that was our main priority. So when, as this island nation, we have so many airfields, airports, jetties, ramps where boats could dock hurriedly, ports, of course, enormous ports where container ships with thousands of containers dock virtually every day of the week. Look at the ports that serve us, Zeebrugge, Calais and many others. We've got the Channel Tunnel taking a huge amount of freight and foot passengers every day. So in essence, to say that we could ever secure our borders even if we built a razor wire covered watchtower by every jetty at every airstrip, and we had machine gun toting officers with binoculars and lighting and all of that, they would simply still be breached. We can talk about harsh border controls. We can talk about more resources, all of which would help.
Yeah.
But in essence, we're a vulnerable island nation, and people will always, despite the finest efforts of law enforcement, they will find a way to smuggle drugs, guns, people, and other forms of contraband into our nation.
So one of the key defining topics of the referendum in 2016 was, tighter control of our borders. You're painting a bleak picture here. That might not even be possible.
No, I'm painting a realistic picture, because it quite simply is a fact of life that with the coastline that we've got and being an island, people will always find a way. Now, that's not to say we throw in the towel and give up and let people flood into the country and all the contraband. Of course we don't, because we've got the National Crime Agency and our police forces, and we've got Border Force, and we've got Coast Guard, and we've got our Navy that so often patrol our territorial waters. But they can still be breached. More resources will help, of course. And the age of austerity that we've lived through, and that some will try and convince us we're coming out of, has led to a reduction. A huge, massively damaging reduction in police numbers, border force numbers, and more.
And we've seen, haven't we, that if we clamp down on the port of Dover, or if we clamp down at Heathrow or the Channel Tunnel, like water, it always finds a way to leak somewhere else. And we saw that with the Essex case, right? This was coming from into different ports via the Republic of Ireland, and so there's always a way, there's always a will, because it's a hugely profitable business. I mean, how big is this industry, and do we even know how many people are in the UK illegally?
No, quite frankly, we don't. And anybody that's going to try and give an accurate estimate, I think, is being somewhat untruthful, because I think they're only guesstimates. We simply don't know. Do a tour of our coastal ports. See the volume of traffic that comes in. Watch those endless ferries as the trucks roll in and roll off. And yes, there are some procedures. Yes, there's heat-seeking detectors. Yes, there's CO2 detectors. Yes, there are physical stops and searches. But, it comes down really to kind of three major things. Number one, the volume. The volume of trade, goods and people that comes into our nation every day of the week. That in itself is an issue. Okay. Secondly, resources, which I've spoken about. They've been dwindling in recent years, and they simply aren't enough. And lastly, it comes down to really the economy, because the wheels of the economy are the most important factor, I would argue, to most of our politicians. Of course, they have an obligation to keep us safe, and that should be the top priority. But in order to do all of that, you need an economy that is moving and thriving and generating profit and taxes, and is therefore able to pay for all the resources, the police, border force, and those kind of people. So if you wanted to stop and search every truck, every lorry, every person that came into the nation, it would grind to a halt. It simply wouldn't function, the economy wouldn't be there, and it is simply unworkable.
But whether we like it or not, people smuggling is big business, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of money in this. And one of the things that I've always struggled with is this idea of, refugees welcome. It's great in principle, isn't it, that we're a caring nation that welcomes the neediest. But it's also, is it not, fueling a dirty, illegal, horrendous business?
Yeah, absolutely. And the people that sit at the top of this criminality are absolutely unscrupulous and ruthless, and you could probably apply that throughout all of the different levels of this particular criminality. When people are seen as a commodity and they are herded into, frankly, as we know. I mean, look at the Chinese, was it 58 or so in the year 2000?
That's right.
This didn't start yesterday. We know that these people pay a lot of money to be transported, get herded and transported in the most inhumane and so often fatal circumstances. Meanwhile, the kingpins make a lot of money. And will we see any of the kingpins who were behind this recent tragedy brought to court? Let's hope so, but of course it's a global investigation now. It could stretch as far as China, of course, and possibly beyond, across multiple borders, multiple law enforcement agencies that have got to speak to one another, and they all have their own separate rules and protocols as to what they will and will not disclose. So we need cooperation, we need commitment, of course, and a resolve if we are ever to see those who are ultimately responsible for this in a court of law.
You know, some of the most chilling things that you hear when you speak to experts on people trafficking is precisely what you just said, and that is these criminals do not treat humans like humans. They may as well be a washing machine. It's a thing. What are the worst things that you've seen or encountered in your considerable experience of just how horrendous or how far these people are prepared to go?
Well, a washing machine would probably have the benefit of some polystyrene or styrofoam package, some cardboard outside of that, and then some kind of cellophane plastic wrapping around it in order that it doesn't get damaged, so that the goods arrive in proper working order. These poor people who are trafficked aren't dealt with anywhere near as well as a washing machine. You know, the stories of people, of course, who are not fed or watered properly, because if they are, they then need to go to the toilet. And when they're locked in a container or a refrigerated trailer or in the back of a van or something like that, the person that is driving that vehicle most certainly does not want to stop so these people can get out and have a toilet break and potentially be discovered and their whole plot be thwarted. It is criminality of the highest level. Of course, it is putting people's lives at risk and it is costing people their lives. This investigation, currently being conducted by Essex Police, for some of those detectives will be a once-in-a-career type investigation. And it, of course, will take considerable resources. Look at what we already know in terms of links to other countries, all the travel that's going to have to be done to hopefully gather all the evidence, identify the offenders. Part of me fears that we will never see everybody responsible for this criminality throughout their chain of command. We won't see them in a court of law being suitably punished. As an optimist, I hope we do. As a realist, I fear that may not happen.
But how do we stop this? There must be, you know, measures. There must be a way, or at least of taking this away as a concern. I mean, is it harsher penalties? Is it incarcerating the arrivees themselves? Or is it, like we saw in Australia, Operation Sovereign Waters, building detention centres, say, in Libya? There must be a way we can tackle this.
Well, yes, and I suggest there are a number of things that can be done. I'll make no apology for mentioning the R word, resources, again. That most definitely would help, would be a factor. But these people are so determined, those being smuggled are so determined to come to what they perceive as being a better life, and those who facilitate that are so determined to earn their money from it. So we will never eliminate this problem. If we do more checks, if we go and liaise with the Belgians and we put some of our resources out into Zeebrugge, for example, and I know there has been calls for that from the Belgians, apparently. If we did that, yes, it may help. Will it solve the problem? No, it manifestly will not, because of the cunning, the deviousness, and the determination of those who want to facilitate this people smuggling. So we will never, ever solve it. If you look, for example, at the drugs industry, okay, for half a century or so, we have fought that war on drugs and manifestly lost it. And why have we lost it? Because the demand is always there. And the demand for drugs has never properly been tackled. So consequently, there will always be the supplier of those drugs.
What about harsher penalties? We hear we've got Priti Patel at the moment. It's a tough on crime, central Tory doctrine. Harsher penalties, longer sentences, the death penalty. Do these things work?
Well, I am fervently against the death penalty, because I most certainly don't want to live in a nation where we slaughter our own. Harsher penalties, well, any penalty without rehabilitation, Any imprisonment without rehabilitation is quite frankly a waste of time.
Right.
And the reoffending rates will bear that out. But yet again, if we look at the prison service that we have in the UK, chronically underfunded, people held in absolutely inhumane conditions, and consequently they are not in an environment where they can get education, vocational training, and learn by example from staff that look after them, because the staff are so overworked and underpaid, quite frankly. They're just too busy turning keys in locks and not doing anything constructive to rehabilitate people. So that is why our reoffending rates are where they are at.
It's interesting though, because you hear a lot about rehabilitation and retribution and where do you sit on that. You know, I spent a bit of time in kind of maximum security jails talking to men about their mental health, and it seems to me that if you treat people with more humanity, it works, but it doesn't go down well with the public, does it? They want this idea of people being shackled to the floor and punished. But it doesn't really...
certain members of the public might do. It's definitely not my friends. But, you know, we need to rehabilitate people. If they go into prison for whatever length of term that is, whether it be a short sentence, and we know there has been talk of short sentences being abolished almost, but whatever the length of sentence, people need to be kept in humane conditions. And I'll tell you why. And they shouldn't be in squalid conditions. I've met many prisoners, of course. I'm responsible, together with my colleagues, for putting hundreds of people into prison for literally thousands of years. And I've been to many prisons. I've never met a prisoner who wants to do another day in jail. Them being deprived of their liberty is punishment enough. You don't then have to make their incarceration unbearable. The punishment is being locked away, denied getting into bed with your loved one every night, denied your home, denied your children, denied your friends, and all of that. So, when we lock people up, they should be dealt with in an appropriate manner where they can be rehabilitated, they can learn, they can get vocational training, and they can come out with the ability, the skills, and a determination never to go back inside, and secondly, to contribute to society like the overwhelming majority of us do.
Okay, so a huge issue in London is knife crime. In a nutshell, what do you think can be done? What would you do about knife crime in London if you're in control of the violence units now? What would you do?
If I was in control of a police unit, then of course I would be beating that drum very loudly for more resources. It's a thorny subject.
Yeah.
But stop and search works.
It does.
We've had figures this week, okay, that have talked about the increased number of people being arrested in possession of weapons. Why is that? Because the police have been doing more stops and searches.
Yeah.
That's it. Take, for example, because I know it's a thorny subject, but it is a vital tool in the police's armoury. It really is. It works. Yes, it's not perfect. But if it's done courteously, it has to be firmly, so often done, and people are given some form of an explanation as to why it is happening, then I would like to think that those who are aggrieved about it might become a lesser number.
And what about the more preventative things we hear about, such as youth clubs, and does that work, or is it all about more stricter policing and monitoring?
The whole knife crime issue is complex, and the reasons why somebody leaves their home, and when they do that they go, right, there's my key, there's my phone, there's my knife. The reasons why people do that are complex. Social deprivation, absent fathers potentially, exclusions from school, you know, a lack of opportunity, lack of youth services. I could go on. These are complex issues, and it won't be solved overnight.
You know, it's funny because, like, when you talk to people in prisons, the wardens themselves, they say that the more time you spend around these sort of topics, the more you look at people's sort of traumatic childhood experiences, the life that they've led before they offend. But it's unpopular to be more namby-pamby, isn't it?
Well, I believe in a firm and fair police service. That's what I want to see. That's why we work so hard to pay our taxes. That's what
Yeah.
we deserve. I had an experience this week where I was sat in the public gallery of court number 12 at the Old Bailey, and I saw a man called Shane O'Brien get sentenced for 26 years, life with a minimum term of 26 years, because he pulled a Stanley knife out of his pocket in a bar and without any provocation, justification whatsoever, then slashed a wonderful 21-year-old young man called Josh Hanson. He slashed him from his left ear across his chest, and essentially dear Josh drowned on his own blood.
Cool.
What made Shane O'Brien carry a knife that night? Well, maybe one day somebody in prison will ask him and he might tell. He had 2 previous convictions with regards to weapons. Okay, so this was somebody who clearly was okay and thought it fine to take a knife out onto the streets of Britain, when of course it fundamentally is not. We have to tackle it. There is a tide of teenage bloodshed pouring through our streets, and it should be a matter of great alarm for us all. Resources, yes. Looking at the more complex issues, most definitely.
Wow. Well, Peter, we'll have to wrap it up at that. Fascinating. We could talk all day. You're quite scary on the telly, but in real life, you're lovely. So there you go. Hey, look, guys, this is over to you. What a lot to think about there. Tough on knife crime, human trafficking. Can we ever actually police our borders? And should we even have the death penalty? There's loads to talk about. Please get involved across all of our social media platforms. Get involved, comment, share. This is your show. Now it's over to you. Thanks for tuning in.